We're in. Let's do it. Conquer fam, what's going on? It's Coach Tommy Palms. It's Coach Jared here, bringing you guys another YouTube talk. Today we got a fun discussion. We're going to be talking about how to assess athletes and decide where you're going to spend most of their time building up their energy systems and where you're going to focus their training points so that you can make them more developed and prepared for whatever sport they need to participate in. But before we get into that, we're going to do a little banter just because I think we didn't do that last time. So I hope you guys like some banter. Jared, what's going on, man? I have a question for you instead of just asking you what's going on. What are you doing you don't do MMA, you do jiu-jitsu, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, cool. So I'm just gonna get the people to know you a little bit more. What belt are you? Not that that necessarily matters because each gym is a different way of giving out belts, but just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I'm a purple belt right now.
Cool. And how long have you been doing it for?
Honestly, I started probably over a decade ago and then was just on and off with college and then CrossFit and injuries. And it wasn't until maybe 2 years ago that I kind of got serious again.
What sparked you to get back into it?
I really loved CrossFit for a long time and I still love it. But the competitive side of me was just kind of like, I was just done. I was ready to shift gears. And what I really like about jiu-jitsu is it's just like it can branch off into so many things. You're never ever done learning. It's very similar to CrossFit, which is why I think you see a lot of people kind of gravitating toward that when they want to explore different things and use their fitness. But it's just a different concept to be in, and it's nice not to be the one teaching sometimes.
No, I agree with that 100%. Like being the student is fun, like way more fun than being the coach sometimes. But yeah, no, that's cool. Okay, so you've been doing it. So you started up in high school then, you said?
Yeah, it was somewhere
college?
around there. It was like 2009. Maybe I started doing like no gi stuff. There wasn't any place to go around and actually do like put on a gi and do that. But it was like probably around 2009.
Very cool. Very cool. And now how often do you do that? 3 days a week?
Yeah, typically 2 to 3 days a week. One on the very, very low end if my schedule gets all messed up. But yeah, typically 2 to 3.
That's solid. That's really solid. And do you do gi or no gi?
Both.
Yeah. Your gym practices both.
Yep.
Cool. I like that. And so do they practice gi twice a week and no gi 3 times a week, or is it kind of depend on the class time?
Yeah, it depends on the class time. There's a lot of but I go like in the midday class because it fits my schedule well because I'm up at like 3:30 in the morning. I can't do any late evening classes, man.
No chance. No chance. That was my main issue. I started doing MMA. It was an MMA gym that taught Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then it was more kickboxing the other day. It would alternate, it was really fun. But the issue was like they only had afternoon classes, and I just like couldn't commit to going to 6:30, 7:30 p.m. and that was the most local one. I just didn't do it. So I want to look back into it because it is cool. It's like your time too. Like that's the one thing that I really liked about it was like when I'm in a gym, I'm never really like turned off. Like I can't like if someone walks into a gym, I can't ignore them. Like I'm still on my phone. Like I'm still working even when I'm working out. But when I went there, like that hour was like you couldn't get in touch with me.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
I really liked that. So I'm kind of itching for that again. So might get back into it. I think you're right that a lot of people in CrossFit tend to gravitate towards that. We're seeing a lot of it. I don't know. Do you ever listen to NC Fit podcast with Jason Khalipa?
Every once in a while, yeah.
He's so into it. That's the only reason I ask. You know, he loves it. They nonstop talk about it. And that always makes me want to do it.
I'd love to see what he can do.
Oh, he's definitely nasty. He's definitely humble about it too, but he's definitely good. Yeah, so that's cool. All right, let's get into this. So once again, guys, we're going to talk about like how do you assess an athlete and decide where you're going to spend a majority of their time training their energy systems. And there's a bunch of energy systems that we can kind of talk about. Let's just kind of put it in simplest terms of like alactic, lactic endurance, and then we can kind of talk like anaerobic threshold, and then like aerobic work, right? And so because everyone defines things so differently, but I think that's just like a relatively universal way of understanding kind of how you can train energy systems. And then there's like the CP system that we could also kind of touch on. That's like a forgotten one. Um, and kind of just go about like, okay, how do you look at an athlete and decide which one they should be working on? And it could be multiple. And we'll talk about maybe how you would decide for each type of system what person kind of fits into that description, and we can kind of just banter back and forth. So the first question is like, when you get a client, what kind of endurance tests are you doing to assess like, where could they be weak?
Yeah, good question. So I start with some of the basic benchmarks that you're going to see, whether it's like let's say a row, for instance, you're going to see a 500-meter row, you're going to see a 2K, you're going to see a 5K. I don't ask them to do anything more than that because there's very few times when they're actually sitting on the road for more than 20 minutes at a time. Bike, we'll do like a 1-minute test. And if I'm referring to an air bike, not a bike erg, 1-minute test, 5-minute test, 10-minute test. And if I really want to push them, I'll send them on there for an hour. It just kind of depends on a lot of things, especially with where they're weak according to their own assessment. And then so like it really does vary quite a bit. But I usually hit 2 or 3 of those basic benchmarks with all the modalities, and then use that as a guideline for where I want to start directing things.
Okay, cool. So you do that with a run as well.
Correct. Yep.
What kind of running tests do you do?
So I do 400, 1 mile. And then again, depending on how efficient they are, I may have them do a 5K, but if they're not a good runner, I'm not going to just hammer them just for the sake of doing it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Okay, cool. Now, do you ever do anything a little, well, you said the 1-minute bike, which is a pretty solid test. Have you ever done the 90-90 test on the row?
Have not, no.
That's a gnarly test. 90 seconds on the row, 90 seconds off times 2. Can't get off the rower. You have to stay in there while they're resting. It's a cool test. It's a cool test. Okay, cool. Now, how do you decide based on that type of testing where you're going to kind of gravitate towards in training for these athletes? Like what would be like something that's really eye-opening? Let's just say with like the bike tests of 1, 5, 10, and then an hour. Like what are you looking for? And then how do you assess them?
Yeah. So I'll start by looking at basically like the rate at which they start to deteriorate. Rate of degradation might be a better way of thinking about it. From 1 minute to 10 minutes. If they hit, hypothetically like 50 calories in 1 minute, and then they're holding 100 calories in 10 minutes, like we have a really, really drastic drop off that is significant that needs to be addressed pretty quickly. The 1 hour test is a little bit harder to gauge because it's just, again, there's very few things in CrossFit that's asking you to do something for an hour straight. But a lot of times what I'll do is based on progressions of, maybe aerobic work that might be a kind of a comparison beginning and end. But basically it just comes down to the rate at which they're deteriorating from 1 minute to 5 minutes, from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, and then again 1 minute to 10 minutes for the most part.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, so let's just say someone, and I completely agree with you. Let's just say someone was drastically that bad, right? We could definitely get like a football player who could probably do something like that, right? Like you got like an offensive lineman, for example, like you'd probably see that on a test. So if this person came to you, right, let's just say like, hey, I'm an ex offensive lineman. At one point he weighed 275 pounds or 300 and was 6'6". Actually, let's bring it down. Let's say he was a linebacker at 250 and he's like 6'2", right? And now he's like, okay, I lost like 20, 30 pounds since playing college football. I'm 220 now. I'm 6'1", and I want to get into the sport of CrossFit. I love it. And you see that like, okay, yeah, this guy is a monster, 50 calories in a minute, which would make a ton of sense. And then like 10 minutes, let's just say he got like 120, right? And it's like, ooh, that's pretty poor actually. What would you be thinking and how would you then go address this guy?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually have a client who's playing professional football in Europe right now, so he kind of fits the mold pretty close.
Yeah,
I don't know at the top of my head what his 10-minute bike is. For a lot of them, it's just starting with building a huge aerobic base. So
yeah,
much of what they do, in that particular example, right? They're playing for 5 to 7 seconds, or probably even less than that, 3 to 5 seconds, 40 seconds rest. So their base is pitiful.
yeah.
They probably have gotten pretty exceptional at working fast, recovering, and so they can do those short intervals really, really quick. But anything longer, they really struggle with. So one thing that I'm a big fan of, because it worked for me, it works for a lot of athletes once they wrap their brain around it, is like the Brian McKenzie system for breathing. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it basically it's just gears of breathing to make sure that they're put in an optimum range, because a lot of them just want to go, go, go. So if I say, hey, we're going to do nasal breathing for maybe 20, 25 minutes, I don't care the modality you pick, bike, row, whatever, we're going to work at
Hmm.
that pace, but it does limit how much they're going to be able to output. It's going to make them use their diaphragm more, and obviously that's going to have a lot of carryover into the medium 5 to 10 minute range work for them.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, cool. Now, alongside of that, like, would you be doing anything else? Like, let's just, how many days a week would you be having them do more of that nasal breathing type efforts? And then would you be pairing that with anything else?
Yeah, so another good question. It honestly it just depends on how bad they are, right?
Yeah,
If
yeah,
if 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 they are somebody that exceptionally strong, exceptionally powerful, and they're already cleaning, 350, like they don't need to get any stronger. We can afford to have them touch on strength maybe once a week and devote a lot more of their time toward developing a base so that they can take the height of their pyramid a lot higher. So for
yeah.
somebody like that, minimum twice a week. And I say like an optional third day if they're feeling good and on like a active recovery day. Hey, I'm going to go and do this stuff. Here it is. You can go do it. But definitely a minimum of 2 days a week where they're focusing on those things. As far as adding other elements in, that's where it gets tricky. Just like running will make you better at running.
Hmm.
Adding wall balls to running may not make you be a good runner if you can't be efficient at wall balls. So there's so many different elements to add and mix in. So when it comes to things like that, I always start with a really, really simple things. So it might be like, if we're trying to build a running base, great. We might add in something like a very methodical, slow Cindy. Like you're going to do 5 strict pull-ups, 10 push-ups, 15 air squats. I'm going to continue running. So we can build some extra volume in with things that are not monostructural, and do them in doses that aren't going to ultimately fatigue them, but introduce a new stimulus to them so they can figure out how their body's going to adapt to those things. Or, you can still throw in something like a wall ball, but small volume, because anything more than probably 15 to 20 is going to elevate their heart rate, where it's going to be difficult for them to maintain an optimum heart rate zone and breathing zone.
Yeah. Okay, so you're talking a little more specific there with some mixed modal work, which is cool. Um, okay, so yeah, obviously, if someone is on that spectrum where they could work really hard for a minute, and not do so well for 10 minutes, right? Like, we're gonna have to work on their aerobic base. Now, I'd also be interested to see how well like their anaerobic threshold is too, right? Because when you're working on that 1 minute, you're not really tapping into that zone too much either. It's really just, you know, pure just like go, right?
Sure.
So I would also want to be interested to see like, okay, how, where is that? And maybe I would do some intervals, specifically around that zone, and maybe with biking just to see if there could be some improvements there. Um, that would be also something I would probably play with as well. But I definitely agree with the slower efforts as well, just to build that base and just have them get used to working for longer durations, because they're obviously not going to be used to that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now let's take someone who can do, let's say in the 10 minutes, 150 calories. So like a solid score, right?
Mm-hmm.
15 calories a minute, but in that minute can only get like 30 calories, right? So we would say that they're going to be a lot weaker, right? What type of work would you do to get someone to be able to become more powerful on these machines?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny because I would start looking at a lot of other things as well. I would look at what their Olympic lifts look like, what their basic strength lifts look like, because from my perspective and my experience, they're probably weak across the board then too. Like
Mm-hmm.
if it's like the fast twitch, have the fast twitch, so it's going to show up in their clean, their snatch, everything. Um, and so it can be a lot of things. I've even played with, we talked last time about like the whole like dynamic effort method. And so there are some instances where them just doing rapid power production with a barbell in some aspect would have some carryover, not a great carryover, but some carryover to a machine. But if we go back to the actual bike, a lot of it comes down to um, kind of seeing where I would look at where their threshold was within that minute. So, if they're averaging 80 RPM, at what point did they start falling off? Are they falling off at like the 30-second mark and it's pretty drastic, or is it they were able to hold a consistent pace? They just didn't have the top end. And so if somebody's lacking a top end, it does come down to hitting like those, I'll say like 5 to 10 seconds is probably on the long end of that. Max sprint intervals, followed by in the better part of like 2 to 3 minutes of rest, maybe even more, so they can actually tap into that system where they're, truly hitting a max output. Because based on the data you already talked about, they don't do that with any frequency. They've gotten so comfortable at hypothetically almost like pacing things that their ability to recruit all their muscle fibers at a quick rate probably isn't there.
Yeah. I would agree with that. We're looking like alactic work here. You said 5 to 10. I think 10 to 22. Like I think you definitely start where you're saying, especially if they're really weak, and try to build them out. Um, do you think that this could be helpful for some CrossFitters?
Um, it's all depends on the person. It's so I would say for the most part, CrossFitters are probably more biased toward the short stuff than the long stuff, and their ability to maintain a higher work rate for a longer period of time is probably pretty low, but they're better at going fast and then just slowing down. So yeah, it just depends.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think where some CrossFitters could benefit from this is, there's a lot of workouts where you have to be able to go really fast on the machines for multiple rounds. So a workout that kind of comes to mind is from semifinals when they had to do those 10 calories on the Echo bike for 7 rounds, right? Where you're not going to obviously blitz it, but when you think about your potential to hold higher outputs for longer periods of time, you have to look at what that peak is. And if you are just someone who can't really create a lot of power on those machines, then you're going to be limited by just whatever that peak is. So for you, if your max output for 10 seconds is 80 RPMs, but all the best athletes in the world are holding 75 RPMs for this workout with ease, you're not going to be able to do the same thing, right? So I do
Sure.
think that for some people, depending upon what movement you're looking at, and what monostructural machine that is, that's where sometimes this can come into play. I even think in the off season, this can be a great place, because to say that's specific to the sport, probably not, right? We do have times where that can be specific, but probably not, right? It's going to be more, like you said, being able to, sustain. So that's why I think it's great in the off season potentially. But then you also do have workouts where it stretches out a little bit longer than what we're talking about, 10, 20 seconds. Maybe we would consider this more, lactic endurance. But where we had this workout at semifinals this year where it was 30 and 22 calories on the Echo bike into ring muscle ups into dumbbell lunge, right? Like
Right.
you had to just send that bike. There was no pacing that. If you paced that, you lost right there. Right. So that's where these things can come into play, I think, which is really cool. and that's what makes CrossFit so unique, right? So that's great. I love that. So
So
that's
let me
another example. Yeah, go off that. Go off that.
let me jump in. I'm curious because you mentioned off season, and this is where I think it does get really challenging for, if you're at the games level where that if you give your best effort, you're going to qualify for the games, and then there's the crowd that kind of falls somewhere in between. It if you want to try to continue to get better, you want to go and compete and hit other events like a Wadapalooza or whatever the case may be. Um, you know, when is off season, or is there no off season? I think I've heard you talk about it before, that block periodization, it can work for certain athletes, but I would say for a lot of athletes it probably just isn't feasible because they don't want to wrap up their whole entire year focused on one singular event. They're looking at multiple things. They want to try to peak at 3 or 4 times a year, where that type of methodology doesn't really fit.
I
So
would
how
agree
would
with
you
that.
so how would you tackle some of these things in terms of developing an aerobic system, whether it's on the short end or on the long end? Um, and obviously try to hit everything at one time, continue to make sure everything's moving in the right direction when there really isn't an off season for most people.
Yes. So that's a great question. I think another topic that we can just dive into right now. So I'm thinking a few ways of how I want to answer this. So let's just put this into perspective from a few athletes. Like, for example, my athlete Nikki, we're peaking for one competition this year. Actually, we're gonna do two and have two peaks. She's gonna do another one, but like it doesn't matter how she does in it. I don't. It's a team fun workout. So there are two comps that we're gonna peak for. And one of them is going to be semifinals, and the other is going to be in more like October-ish or November, sometime around there. So to her, it's easy, right? Because we have those goals. Now, for most people, that's not it. It's like, yeah, this one's going to pop up at this time. This one's going to pop up at this time. So I think that's where, undulating periodization, comes in, and you can utilize it really well. And what you'll see with that type of periodization is that you're not going to have these like marginal gains. You're not going to see that. You're going to see very small gains linearly though throughout the entire year. And I think that's why I love that type of periodization and type of training, because most people don't need to be peaked for one competition. Like you said, they just want to stay ready kind of the entire year. And essentially how I kind of think about it is like having faucets, multiple sink faucets, right? And they're all turned on, okay, but some are turned on more than the other. And this one could be strength, this one could be gymnastics and conditioning and mixed modal work, and where you are in the year, you're going to turn certain ones on more than the other, right? I think that most people should kind of use the CrossFit season as a way of determining what their off season looks like, because I think what's really cool is that even though most people don't go to semis or the games, there's still a lot of competitions around that time as well. Which is like a great way to like, okay, we're peaking for quarterfinals. We're going to hammer that. And then we're going to deload a little bit. And then we're going to just stay where we're kind of at. And now we're just going to kind of control, maybe get a couple competitions in over the spring and summer. And then you probably have to take some time off, I think, a little bit. Otherwise, you're probably going to burn out or get hurt. And I think that's why most people burn out or get hurt, because they don't do that. There has to be an off season. There has to be. And it's really hard to get athletes to do that because, like you said, they always want to compete or they always want to feel fit, right? And you don't need to do that in any other sport. That's the big issue that we have, right? And that's why the burnout rate's so high. That's why we see so many injuries. It's not because of how people are training necessarily. It's just that they're not taking time off to actually recover or get healthy. So regardless though, for most people, I'm not going to pretend like I made this up. Dynamic periodization is what I would pretty much call it, where Evan Pycon talks a lot about that type of periodization, where you're really working on everything all the time. It's just kind of what you're prioritizing.
Hmm. No, I think that was a great answer. Um, and I agree. I think for most athletes, and I love your analogy of the faucets. I think that's a great one. That's pretty easy to comprehend. But I would say for I think 99% of my athletes, that's exactly what's going on. You can't afford to completely abandon strength because there's always a place to get strong. You can't afford to completely abandon conditioning. The intensity might drop somewhere, and they might seem like um, progress isn't improving in one particular area, but as long as they can maintain where they're at with less work, great. We haven't lost anything. And then, like you said, most athletes just aren't in that avenue where they can work their whole yearly schedule around one or two things. So they need to basically be ready for a little bit of everything. And like you said, the hard part is just helping them to modulate the right volume, right intensity, and also be willing to give themselves a break. I don't I don't know why it's such a hard concept to like just take a little time off, take a week off and go do something. But for most CrossFitters, I think they've gotten themselves so wrapped up in the idea of intensity that they feel like letting go of it means they're going to lose everything they put all their work into.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, and what's interesting is that like I think people perceive off season as like not training hard, which
Mm-hmm.
isn't actually the case. It just means you're not doing your sport, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
football players in their off season are still training hard. They're just not playing football because
Mm-hmm.
like they can't. So like what does your off season look like as a competitive athlete is just based around your weaknesses, right? Like similar to what you said like earlier, if you have a guy who's really strong, like you're going to probably be doing a lot of endurance work and that might even include CrossFit workouts, right? But where versus if you're someone who's gets relatively aerobic and fit pretty quickly, but you lack strength, like just spend some time there. Like go get really strong and then you come back into the sport and you're going to be able to be better. You don't let go of it completely though, just like you said. And that's the faucet analogy is I like you're still keeping touches there. I think the biggest mistake actually you can do is not keep touches on certain things. I think completely letting go of things is a horrible idea for CrossFit athletes, in my opinion. You have to keep some things, but you just prioritize other and spend more time there so that you can become a more complete athlete. And, you know, I've had success. I'm not going to pretend like I haven't. I have had success with like not really prioritizing anything with some athletes and actually just bringing everything up together as one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, versus and then I've had times where like I was like, no, we're really just focusing on strength right now and we're not going to do that much endurance work, but we'll just keep it fresh for you, especially competing in the sport of CrossFit. That's another aspect that needs to stay fresh, which just means like doing a singular hard CrossFit Metcon once a week and giving all your effort into it. That has to stay there. But yeah, I that's kind of like my thoughts around it.
And that made me think of one thing that's been on my mind for a while, which is, I've never ever, well, I shouldn't say never ever, maybe only a handful of times have I ever seen anything on like CrossFit.com or a lot of, we'll call it typical um, affiliate workouts where there's rest. It's always like for time,
Mhm.
AMRAP, or something along those lines. It's never like, hey, we're going to work for 4 minutes and rest 2 minutes. We're going to have a 2-to-1, work to rest or a 1-to-1 work. Um, and I think that people miss out on that. I understand that because that can be very difficult when you have people that don't even know what the workout is and you're telling them to count the rest and and try to match that over the course of intervals. But I think that's another component that um, is certainly important in order to manage an appropriate intensity, whether it's high. Low intensity doesn't really need to have a whole lot of rest, but for high intensity, if you want to be able to sustain those efforts, that people see those type of workouts, and I would say the average person and a regular affiliate just doesn't see that stuff. Why do you think that
Yeah.
is?
Um, what's pretty funny is I don't think you actually know this about me, but I used to work for CrossFit. I worked for CrossFit affiliate programming.
Mm-hmm.
So we would cap. And I would create some workouts, and I always like tried putting in intervals, and it was just like, no, we're not doing that. I was like the guy known to do intervals, and it was just like they'd let me do it every once in a while. Like, but it was like once a week. If I programmed that week, it was like once a week I could have intervals in there. And um,
What was
I
the
think
pushback?
the pushback was just like the similar to what you kind of said, with just like keeping everyone on the same page and things like that. I think was more so. It's also not like the typical CrossFit methodology. It's just not. So, and
Mhm.
that you had to really stay true to in cap, which is fine. But I remember I programmed an interval workout, and the amount of feedback that we got from the gyms, like, dude, that was the best workout ever. Like, loved it. Like, it was like the running joke for a little while. Um, because when you do them, you're like, oh my God, like this is a whole different level of
Mhm.
intensity, you know. Um, so yeah, I think that the it is that, and I program for my gym, and like we do intervals all the time. We don't do like for time with rest. We just do AMRAPs, AMRAP 3, rest 1 minute. Just way
Mhm.
everyone's on the same clock to keep it easy, or EMOMs or things like that. But like they're so much fun too. And it gives someone to like it teaches people how to pace. There's so much greatness around intervals that I do think a lot of people miss the mark on. And I think that's actually one of the things that, I mean, I know when I started following Jay's program, I did not do a lot of intervals. And then we started doing intervals. And I was like, I don't know if I could like survive this. Like, this was just nuts, dude. Like, you want me to do that how many times? It would be like 3 rounds for time, rest half the time it takes times three. And I'd be like, what the fuck? Um, and I just didn't know how to pace and do all that stuff. And
Mhm.
that was really cool. And yeah, I think people definitely miss out on that. And yeah, that's why.
We've
Yeah,
kind
man.
of deviated pretty far from. I don't even know what the original topic was now, but um, it was on energy systems and
And
devising. But
assessing people, yeah.
but I think all this still does kind of come full circle, and the fact that I like to use intervals for a lot of my athletes um who struggle to find like an appropriate pace. If they're really good at going gas pedal down, but they really can't figure out what that 85-90% pace is, I'm going to give them just the amount of rest where they can go and hammer that and see consistent paces every single time. And we might even do those repetitively for a while, not like every single workout, but we'll do them from a week to week basis until they get a better feel for, okay, I can finish this interval in a minute 20 and then a minute 20. And if I start seeing those pop up, it's like, okay, I know that they've got the adaptation that I want, and they've actually figured out, what it is to pace at this effort, or and recover with a minimal amount of rest.
No, totally. I mean, yeah, my athletes do. Honestly, most of my athletes, I would say, if there's 5 conditioning sessions a week for them, 4 of them are intervals. They
Mm-hmm.
might get one that's not. Um, and just for all the great benefits you were talking about, understanding pacing, pushing intensity, how to appropriately break things up. Like, there's so much good that come from them. I love them. Yeah, forever using them.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, man, I think although we did deviate a little bit, we gave some good insight here. I think people will like this one. Do you got any kind of closing thoughts?
Um, how about this? I don't necessarily think it has to be a book, but who's kind of been your go-to, since we're on the endurance topic? Who's been your
Yeah.
go-to like resource for things of that nature, whether it's in the CrossFit realm or outside the CrossFit realm, that you've tried to bring in and utilize?
Um, a couple. I'm trying to think about who I want to talk about. Um, I would say Evan Pycon did the best job of being. Well, he used to work for Train Think Tank. He doesn't anymore. I think he left a long time ago to just he created a device that can measure nitric oxide in your blood. which is just really cool. I actually have it. But regardless, I think he did an amazing job at being able to explain just what we're talking about, how to assess athletes and then build training programs around them, and then look at limiters and how to work on those limitations, whether it's delivery or utilization limited, respiratory. And I have utilized his stuff and I've seen nothing but amazing results from it. So he's been my favorite. I think everyone knows Joel Jameson. You mentioned Brian McKenzie. I think his book is great. There's ultra endurance books, critical power books. But Evan Pycon, I would say, has had the biggest influence on my endurance training programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not super familiar with Evan. Like I said, a lot of my stuff, I came from more of like a running background. So first it was kind of the Romanov stuff and the pose running and all the things that kind of encompassed that. And that grew into Brian McKenzie, not so much the CrossFit endurance stuff, but more like when he shifted, it was like power speed endurance, and then it changed several times. A lot of that pointed me in the direction of the breath work, which for me was a big eye opener. And it made a huge difference for me. And I continue to use that stuff with a lot of my athletes. And then honestly, it might not be purely endurance related, but I love listening to Andy Galpin. Like I could listen to that dude talk for hours because he just so smart, says it explains things in a way that is very, very easy to understand. But when he's working with athletes who are going to the Olympics and fighting in the UFC championships, clearly the guy is super intelligent. And so I like listening to him for a lot of things and trying to figure out how to manipulate those things into the CrossFit space.
Andy Galpin is the second biggest influence for sure. He has an awesome YouTube page. I know right now he's releasing all these podcasts, but that's, I don't know, 3 weeks old. He has YouTube videos on like lectures that he gives at his colleges, and I've listened to a majority of those. And he has one on endurance that I think is probably a little outdated now, but still breaks it down in a solid way. And I've utilized that, and I love that guy as well. The same reasons you said. The way he just breaks things down is so simple, and he creates practical examples, and that's because he's worked with a lot of people. So yeah, I love that one. I love that.
Cool.
Yeah, man. Hey, this is great. Thanks for hopping on once again. I look forward to our chat next week. Conquer fam. Hope you guys enjoyed this YouTube talk. We will catch you guys next time.
See ya.
I don't know how to stop recording. Oh, here it is.
That's what I figured.